Born on the vast, windswept steppes of Mongolia, Kubish entered a world defined by hardship and survival. His early years were marked by loss, his parents taken by disease, leaving him in the care of distant relatives who struggled to provide for their own families. Even by the harsh standards of Mongol society, his childhood was exceptionally brutal. His name, Kubish, meant not human, a title believed to protect children from evil spirits, but it also reflected the detachment with which he was viewed. Living on the margins, he endured freezing winters in felt tents, long days herding animals, and constant hunger gnawing at his stomach. Yet these experiences didn't break him. They forged in him a quiet endurance and a deep bond with nature. Horses were his first companions, creatures he trusted more than people. Unlike other boys who were coddled or guided, Kubish learned to navigate life through observation and instinct. His life mirrored the bleak fates of many before him. Expendable, invisible, but history often remembers the forgotten when they become part of something greater. Kubish didn't aspire to glory or power, he simply wanted to survive, and in time, that instinct would place him within one of the deadliest military machines the world has ever seen. By the time he was a teenager, Kubish had already learned what most grown men in other lands never would: how to kill without hesitation. Raised in a culture where nearly every male was either a warrior or served the military in some way, Kubish's path was almost inevitable. The Mongol Empire, in its prime, demanded complete devotion from its people, and to serve meant more than just following orders. It meant embodying the identity of a conqueror. He was inducted into the cavalry, not because he was particularly strong or skilled, but because he could endure, stay silent, and do as commanded. His training was brutal. Days spent learning to ride without reins, shoot arrows while galloping, and sleep in the saddle. He grew accustomed to discomfort, to discipline, and to the cold detachment required of a soldier. The cry, "Feed the horses," was more than a logistical command. It was often the signal to unleash a torrent of violence upon the enemy. Kubish came to understand that survival within the Mongol ranks wasn't about being the fastest or strongest, but about being invisible when necessary and merciless when called upon. Though he would never rise to the fame of a general or the reverence of a Khan, his quiet obedience and deadly precision made him an essential cog in a war machine that brought empires to their knees. The Mongol army Kubish joined was unlike any other force of its time. It was not simply a collection of fighters, but a mobile civilization trained for total war. Its efficiency stemmed from strict discipline and an ability to adapt quickly, attributes that set them apart from even the most seasoned European armies. Though outsiders often viewed them as a chaotic horde, this was far from reality. The word horde itself came from the Mongol term ordu, meaning camp, implying structure, not madness. Kubish, still new to the ranks, was placed within a unit of 10. Each member had a clear role, and every 10-man unit reported to a 100-man commander, who answered to a leader of 1,000, and so on. The chain of command was rigid but fair, and promotion was based on merit rather than lineage. This decentralized, cell-like structure allowed Mongol forces to scatter or combine seamlessly during battle. Kubish quickly learned that the Mongol art of war wasn't just about overwhelming force. It was about speed, cunning, and unity. These were not undisciplined raiders. They were master tacticians who used feigned retreats, ambushes, and psychological terror as strategic tools. Under this structure, even someone like Kubish, without noble blood or ambition, could become essential, trusted to carry out missions that required stealth, endurance, and absolute loyalty. Every warrior in the Mongol cavalry was also a horseman, and in this world, horses weren't tools, they were lifelines. Kubish came to understand that the bond between man and horse was sacred and vital. Each soldier maintained several horses, rotating between them during long campaigns to preserve their strength. This system allowed Mongol forces to cover astonishing distances, often 60 to 100 miles in a single day, outpacing any enemy. Kubish treated his horses with reverence. He named them, cared for their injuries, knew exactly how much they could endure. On the march, he would drink mare's milk, use dried dung for fires, and place raw meat beneath his saddle to cook it with the friction of the ride. It was a way of life built around motion, resilience, and resourcefulness. He heard tales that Mongol children learned to ride before they could walk. Though it sounded exaggerated, he knew it wasn't far from the truth. In time, Kubish himself could ride for days without sleep, shoot accurately while galloping full speed, and read the terrain like an open map. His horse was not just transportation, it was an extension of his body, a partner in both survival and warfare. In a world where men fell like leaves in battle, Kubish's survival often depended more on his horse's legs than his own sword. And just like Kubish, who didn't aim for glory but still became essential to something greater, this channel also grows step by step, rider by rider. Our next milestone is to reach 1,000 subscribers by June 30th, and your support makes all the difference. If you've made it this far into the story, consider subscribing. It's our way of keeping this journey moving forward, together. The true test of a warrior's worth came not only in the chaos of battle, but also in the rituals of discipline that forged the Mongol army's reputation. One such tradition was the Nurj, the Great Winter Hunt, a massive event where thousands of mounted warriors encircled vast swaths of terrain, driving animals inward until they formed a frantic mass at the center. It was part military drill, part survival exercise, and part demonstration of order over nature. Kubish's first Nurj was a moment of both fear and pride. He had to maintain perfect formation, communicate through hand signals and distant shouts, and prevent any animal from escaping the tightening circle. A mistake could bring humiliation or even punishment, but he succeeded. Days of riding, sleepless, nights and bitter cold tested every ounce of his endurance. But Kubish held the line. When the commander finally signaled the moment of release, the bloodletting began, not in chaos, but in orchestrated unity. The meat would feed the warriors, the fur used for warmth, and the exercise itself became a rehearsal for future conquests. Kubish realized the hunt was not about animals. It was about control, timing, and obedience under pressure. It was also where boys became men. By the end, he wasn't just a participant. He was a warrior, marked and shaped by the collective pulse of Mongol might. But the path of a Mongol warrior was not defined solely by battles and discipline. It was also deeply tied to information, deception, and intelligence. Kubish, always observant and quiet, caught the attention of his superiors. His ability to move unnoticed, to read landscapes, and to interpret subtle cues in enemy movement earned him a new role, scout and messenger. It suited him. He was not one for glory on the front lines. His world was the silence before the storm, the shadow between camps, the flicker of movement on a distant ridge. In this position, Kubish became part of the Mongol Empire's most sophisticated and underrated weapon, the Yam system. The Yam was a network of relay stations, each equipped with fresh horses and supplies, allowing messages to travel incredible distances in mere days. Kubish could cover hundreds of kilometers with speed and precision, often traversing enemy territory before battles even began. The Mongols believed rightly that no war could be won without knowing the terrain, the weaknesses, the escape routes. Kubish's eyes became the army's vision. His reports, delivered with unwavering discipline, helped shape the tactics of campaigns that would devastate cities and redefine borders. He did not fight for honor or recognition. He fought for clarity, for understanding the enemy before the first arrow flew. As Kubish journeyed across vast stretches of land, from arid deserts to snow-covered forests, he often rode alone, accompanied only by the rhythmic sound of hooves and the endless sky above. Yet solitude never burdened him. It was in isolation that he felt most attuned to the land and the silent pulse of the empire he served. His missions grew in complexity. Sometimes he delivered critical messages between distant generals. Other times he observed enemy formations days before the main army arrived. These tasks required not only stamina, but also intelligence and instinct. He developed a system of memorizing terrain, noting changes in vegetation, water sources, and even the behavior of birds, which often revealed the presence of human settlements. He was trained to blend into any environment and escape detection, even from local trackers. Kubish knew that if captured, torture and death awaited him, yet he accepted the risk. His anonymity became his armor, his silence, his strength. Every mission he completed reinforced a simple truth. Victory begins long before swords clash or cities burn. To the world, Kubish was a ghost on horseback, invisible yet vital, shaping the course of campaigns through whispers and shadows. To himself, he was simply a man doing what needed to be done to ensure that his people's path forward remained unobstructed. In 1241, the Mongol Empire reached the edge of Europe, and Kubish, now a seasoned scout and courier, found himself riding under the reign of Ögedei Khan, the son of Genghis Khan. The horde had already swept through China and Russia and now turned its gaze toward the west. As the army approached Hungary, Kubish was tasked with monitoring enemy positions and sending updates back to the generals. He observed the Hungarian forces, once nomadic themselves, now hardened into a typical European army with heavy cavalry, thick armor, and rigid formations. The Mongols, by contrast, remained swift, fluid, and lethal. At the Battle of Mohi, Kubish's intelligence reports allowed the Mongols to exploit gaps in the enemy's defenses. The Mongol tactics, feigned retreats, encircling maneuvers, sudden ambushes, overwhelmed the Hungarians. Kubish watched from a distant hilltop as the battlefield turned into a slaughterhouse. Knights in shining armor fell before arrows loosed from horseback, and discipline shattered under the weight of panic. When the bloodshed ended, more than 1 million Hungarians had perished. Kubish had played no direct role in the carnage, yet his contributions helped orchestrate its outcome. He felt no pride in the death toll, only a somber awareness of the consequences of precision and preparation. In war, knowledge could be deadlier than steel. Just when it seemed that the Mongol war machine would continue rolling westward into the heart of Europe, fate took an unexpected turn. In December 1241, Ögedei Khan, revered leader of the Mongol Empire, died suddenly after a night of heavy drinking. The death of a great Khan was not merely a personal loss, it was a political rupture. By Mongol law and tradition, all leaders of the empire were required to return to Karakorum, the empire's capital, to elect a new supreme ruler in what was known as a kurultai, or council assembly. This brought the westward expansion to an abrupt halt. Kubish received orders to return from his scouting route, his next mission suspended indefinitely. Word spread like wildfire through the ranks. The campaign was paused, not because of defeat, but because of death. Europe, trembling at the edge of collapse, was spared. The soldiers didn't question it. Their loyalty lay with the Khan, and without a new Khan there could be no war. Kubish didn't see it as mercy, he saw it as the empire's strength, an unyielding structure even in the face of conquest. For Kubish, this pause was not a retreat, but a moment to reflect on how fragile even the strongest force could become in the absence of its leader. A single man's breath had held the fate of millions. Following the withdrawal, Kubish journeyed east with the rest of the army, returning to the Mongol heartlands in a long, solemn march. Along the way, he passed through towns still bearing the scars of conquest. Walls shattered, fields scorched, silence replacing what once had been vibrant life. Though the Mongols prided themselves on their efficiency in war, the aftermath was often total devastation. Kubish began to notice the contrast between what they left behind and what they built at home. In Karakorum, life was organized and thriving. Relay stations buzzed with activity. Markets overflowed with goods brought from Persia, China, and beyond. Scholars, blacksmiths, translators, and engineers moved through the streets, all protected by the same army that had turned distant cities to ash. Kubish walked through it all with the quiet awe of a man who had helped build something he barely understood. He was part of an empire that could be both cruel and enlightened, brutal, yet advanced. In those moments, he understood the duality of the Mongol legacy. They were destroyers, yes, but also builders of bridges, roads, and systems that connected the known world. His role, though small, fit into a greater mosaic of conquest and creation. Kubish had delivered death and insight in equal measure, and now returned home not as a killer, but as a keeper of the empire's rhythm. Much like Kubish's silent yet vital contribution to connecting cities, cultures, and people across continents, your simple actions like clicking like or following the channel help us carry these stories even further. If you're enjoying this journey through time, let us know with a quick tap. Back in the Mongol heartlands, Kubish resumed his duties not with sword in hand, but with messages at his side. The Yam network remained his realm, and the pace of imperial life quickened even as military campaigns paused. The Mongol communication system was unparalleled. Relay stations stretched across thousands of kilometers, allowing a message to travel from China to the Caspian Sea in a matter of days. Kubish could swap horses at each station, riding until his limbs ached, and then passing the message to another rider who would continue the journey. The process was seamless, built on trust and discipline. Each messenger was a trained warrior, ready to fight if ambushed, but their main weapon was speed. One of Kubish's longest missions took him through the Silk Road, past ancient cities where Persian traders sold. Spices and Chinese artisans displayed their wares. He watched as cultures blended, languages merged, goods exchanged, and stories traveled farther than soldiers ever could. His messages often contained not just commands, but knowledge, reports, observations, strategies that would shape the next steps of the empire. Though he moved in silence, the consequences of his work echoed loudly. While others wielded swords, Kubish rode the arteries of an empire, carrying with him the beating pulse of Mongol power and the invisible threads that held their world together. Despite his growing importance within the empire, Kubish remained a man of few words and fewer desires. The life he had once fought so hard to survive had become the only one he could understand. Relationships were fleeting in the Mongol world. Soldiers left behind families, formed temporary bonds, and disappeared again into the horizon. Kubish avoided entanglements. He had seen too much loss to build anything fragile. His truest companions were still his horses, creatures that never lied, never betrayed, and never hesitated when summoned. He often slept curled beside them under open skies, listening to their breath as if it carried the wisdom of the steppe itself. He drank fermented mare's milk by the fire, shared meals with scouts and traders, and passed through lives like wind over grasslands. Yet even in his solitude, he understood his place in something far larger. He was not a general nor a khan, but he carried their voices. He was not a builder of cities, but his roots connected them. In the stillness between gallops, he pondered the paradox of the Mongol Empire, how it conquered through destruction, yet unified through movement. And though he would never receive the glory sung in war chants or the reverence etched into stone, he had become something far more enduring, a thread woven into the very fabric of a civilization that changed the world. In time, Kubish's role evolved beyond that of a mere courier. He became a trusted intelligence agent, tasked not only with delivering messages, but with gathering sensitive information. The Mongols knew that victory depended as much on strategy as on strength, and men like Kubish were the eyes and ears of campaigns that spanned continents. Before any major attack, he would ride ahead of the army by days or even weeks, scouting enemy positions, measuring river depths, recording the number of guards at city gates, or tracing supply routes. He learned to listen for accents in marketplaces, to study the behavior of livestock that hinted at nearby encampments, and to gauge a settlement's morale by the songs being sung at night. Often, he disguised himself as a trader or a wandering herder to blend in. These missions were perilous. Discovery could mean torture or execution. But Kubish thrived in this world of shadows. His quiet nature, sharpened senses, and instinct for survival made him ideal for the task. He would return to camp not with spoils, but with priceless knowledge, enough to tilt the outcome of battles before a single sword was drawn. Through this work, Kubish understood the true engine behind the Mongol conquests. It wasn't just brute force, but calculated, relentless preparation, and a deep respect for information as power. One of Kubish's most dangerous missions brought him deep into Eastern Europe, where rumors of fortified resistance were growing. Under the cloak of night, he crossed forests and rivers to observe enemy movements, at times sleeping in trees or beneath the remains of ruined outposts. He noted shifts in patrol patterns, intercepted messages written in broken Mongolian, and watched as makeshift alliances formed between once warring factions who now feared a common enemy. His reports, sent back through relay riders, allowed Mongol generals to plan with precision, targeting weak points and exploiting internal divisions. But the closer Kubish moved to enemy borders, the more he saw the suffering left in the horde's wake. Fields burned, families displaced, and towns where no one dared speak above a whisper. It gave him pause. He had long accepted war's brutality, but witnessing its aftermath in unfamiliar tongues made the devastation feel oddly personal. Still, he did not waver. He understood that his role wasn't to weigh justice, but to deliver truth, raw and unfiltered, to those who commanded. Returning from this mission, weary and bruised, he handed over his final scroll, then sat in silence beside his horse, watching the sun rise over a shattered valley. In that moment, Kubish felt both pride and sorrow, the pride of doing his duty and the sorrow of knowing exactly what that duty cost others. As years passed, Kubish's body began to carry the quiet toll of a life spent in the saddle and in the service of empire. His hands, once nimble and steady, were now thick with calluses and stiff from long winters. His knees ached when he dismounted, and old wounds reopened when rain fell too long. Still, he rode. The empire was always on the move, and so was he. While many of his comrades perished in battle or retired into obscurity, Kubish endured, thanks in part to his adaptability and his near-obsessive discipline. He trained younger riders now, teaching them how to read terrain, how to lie convincingly in foreign markets, and how to listen more than speak. He never bragged, never exaggerated. To the untrained eye, he was just another weathered soldier. But within the Mongol camps, his reputation had grown. Commanders sought his opinion quietly. New scouts watched him closely, eager to absorb his methods. He knew better than anyone how to disappear in plain sight, how to move through hostile territory like mist. Kubish had become not just a man, but a standard, one whose value was measured not in titles or land, but in trust. And in an empire held together by speed, fear, and intelligence, there was no currency more precious than trust earned on the edge of the world. But even in the twilight of his service, Kubish couldn't escape the reality that the empire he had served so faithfully was changing. The once unified Mongol horde began to fracture. Infighting between the descendants of Genghis Khan turned brothers into rivals and provinces into battlegrounds. The vast empire, once managed with ruthless efficiency, grew sluggish as its leaders jostled for power. Corruption crept into the system. Orders became delayed. The yam stations were less reliable, and loyalty wavered in places where the Khan's presence was no longer feared. Kubish noticed the signs, not from palace whispers, but from the roads. Messages arrived too late. Stations went unstaffed. Scouts were intercepted with increasing frequency. Even the merchants along the Silk Road seemed less confident in the protection they once enjoyed. Kubish kept his thoughts to himself, but in his gut, he knew. Empires do not collapse all at once. They fray slowly at the edges. He had, carried orders of victory, strategy, and slaughter across thousands of miles, but now he carried something else: doubt. Still, he continued, because a Mongol rider did not stop riding simply because the empire faltered. Kubish was not loyal to power. He was loyal to the path, the mission, and the code that had sustained him all his life. And in a world unraveling, that loyalty became his final act of resistance. When the great Khanates eventually splintered, some becoming Persianized, others adopting Chinese customs, Kubish watched from a distance, never stepping into the politics that consumed so many others. He had seen generals rise and fall, cities burn and rebuild, alliances forged only to shatter months later. To him, these were not the heart of empire. They were its noise. What endured, he believed, were the riders like himself, the anonymous men who crossed deserts and mountains to stitch the far ends of the world together. Kubish's hair had turned silver, his posture stiffened, but his instincts remained sharp. He no longer rode with the urgency of youth, but with the clarity of experience. His saddle still fit him like a second skin, and his gaze could still track movement on the horizon better than most half his age. On one of his final journeys, a young soldier asked him if he regretted anything. Kubish looked ahead, scanning the sky, and said only, "No, because I never expected anything." That answer revealed more than it concealed. His life was never about reward or legacy. It was about presence, purpose, and enduring without expectation. In a world constantly at war with itself, Kubish had found peace not in conquest or rest, but in movement, in loyalty, and in silence. Eventually, Kubish made the quiet decision to stop riding, not because anyone told him to, but because he sensed it was time. He returned to the grasslands of his youth, a place unchanged by the chaos of empires. There, beneath the open sky and endless winds, he built a modest shelter near a river bend where horses came to drink. Word of his return spread slowly, and from time to time, young riders came seeking stories or wisdom. He offered neither. Instead, he handed them a sharpened blade, or helped adjust a saddle strap, showing by action what words could not express. He never wore medals, owned no land, and left behind no children. But in the minds of those who passed through his camp, Kubish was a legend, not of battlefield glory, but of endurance, integrity, and quiet purpose. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and the wind howled through the plains, he lay beside his oldest horse and watched the stars emerge. He felt no fear, no regret. He had ridden farther than most men could dream, witnessed the rise and fading of the greatest empire on earth, and remained true to himself through it all. In a world obsessed with power, Kubish had chosen the warrior's quieter way, the path of steadfast service, silent strength, and unwavering resolve. Kubish's story, though largely unwritten in the grand annals of history, lives on in the legacy of the Mongol spirit that shaped the world. He was one of countless unsung men whose actions, though never celebrated in scrolls or monuments, helped construct an empire that stretched from the Pacific to the Danube. It was men like him, silent, resilient, and fiercely loyal, who carried the empire on their backs. He had no need for recognition. His satisfaction came from knowing that when he was, called, he answered. When others hesitated, he moved. Long after the empires fractured, and the great Khans were reduced to names in books, the impact of their riders endured. Across Asia and into Europe, the ancient paths he once rode remained trade routes. His routes became roads. His instinctive reading of terrain influenced maps, and his understanding of how to move swiftly, quietly, and with purpose would be studied and imitated by warriors and spies for generations. Kubish's footprints, erased by wind and time, had nonetheless shaped the contours of nations. Even if no bard ever sang his name, his deeds echoed across centuries, not in songs or titles, but in the quiet efficiency and calculated bravery of every rider who came after him. In the end, Kubish stands as a testament to a different kind of greatness, the kind not built on fame or fortune, but on discipline, humility, and unwavering commitment to a purpose greater than oneself. His life reminds us that the mightiest empires are not only shaped by visionary rulers or fearsome generals, but also by the quiet individuals who carry out their tasks with precision and heart, even when no one is watching. The Mongol Empire may be gone, its cities reduced to ruins and its armies long disbanded, but the values that sustained men like Kubish, resilience, adaptability, and a steadfast spirit, still resonate in the human experience. Today, as we face our own challenges and uncertainties, there is strength to be found in his story. Not in the conquests or in the bloodshed, but in the endurance, in his silent courage, in his ability to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. Kubish did not leave behind riches, but he left behind a lesson. That greatness often rides quietly beside us, unsung, unnoticed, and unyielding. And sometimes, the most powerful legacy is simply to have never faltered on the journey. Now that you've walked alongside Kubish from the steppes to the twilight of empire, I'd love to hear from you. What part of his story resonated most with you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. It's not just feedback, it's how we continue shaping stories that matter.